The fragmentary intelligence report that reached what remained of German military intelligence services in the chaotic final weeks of April 1945, intercepted from Allied communications, and compiled by desperate analysts operating from makeshift offices as Soviet forces closed in on Berlin, contained information so extraordinary and yet so consistent with the pattern of American industrial and scientific achievement that had characterized the war that even those German officials still capable of objective assessment recognized it as both plausible and profoundly significant. That American scientists and engineers working in a massive secret program, codenamed the Manhattan Project, had successfully developed atomic weapons based on nuclear fission, that these weapons possessed destructive power equivalent to thousands of tons of conventional explosives concentrated in a single bomb, that at least 2 such weapons had been completed and were being prepared for operational use, and that the United States possessed both the scientific knowledge and the industrial capacity to produce additional atomic bombs that would represent a revolution in warfare, making all previous military calculations obsolete. The report, which was presented to Adolf Hitler in the Führer bunker beneath Berlin on April 28, 1945, just 2 days before his suicide, documented that the American program had involved construction of massive industrial facilities at Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and Hanford, Washington, that had employed tens of thousands of workers to produce the fissionable materials necessary for atomic weapons, that a test of an atomic device had been conducted or was planned at a remote location in New Mexico, and that the scale of American investment in the program, exceeding $2 billion and consuming resources that would have been sufficient to build thousands of conventional aircraft or ships, demonstrated American willingness to pursue technological advantages regardless of cost and American confidence that such weapons would prove decisive. Hitler's response to this intelligence, according to fragmentary accounts from bunker personnel who survived, combined dismissal of the report as Allied propaganda designed to intimidate Germany into surrender with bitter acknowledgement that if the intelligence was accurate, it represented the final vindication of every warning about American scientific and industrial capabilities that he had dismissed throughout the war. That the nation he had characterized as racially mongrel and culturally inferior had achieved what German science and German industry had been unable to accomplish despite Germany's supposed technological superiority, and that the atomic bomb represented not just a weapon, but a symbol of American power that would reshape global politics and military affairs in ways that made all of Hitler's strategic calculations irrelevant. The irony that Hitler may have recognized in his final hours was that the Manhattan Project's success was due in significant part to European refugee scientists, including many Jews fleeing Nazi persecution, who had brought their knowledge to America and who had contributed decisively to creating the weapons that would ensure totalitarianism's defeat, and that would establish American scientific and technological leadership for the post-war era. The Nazi regime's persecution of Jewish scientists had driven many of the most brilliant physicists from Germany in the 1930s, including Albert Einstein, and others whose contributions to theoretical physics, the foundation to understanding nuclear fission, and the anti-Semitic concept that the Nazi regime required had thus combined Germany precisely the scientific power that would be essential to the and many of these refugee scientists were working on a project that would contribute to American success in developing atomic weapons. including Albert Speer, to discuss the possibility of atomic weapons development, had concluded by 1942 that producing atomic weapons would require industrial resources and time commitments that Germany could not provide given more immediate military priorities. And Heisenberg's calculations suggested that producing sufficient quantities of fissionable uranium-235 or plutonium would require massive industrial facilities, consuming enormous amounts of electrical power and employing thousands of workers over several years, and that the investment required would divert resources from conventional weapons production that was desperately needed for ongoing military operations. Heisenberg reportedly told Speer that atomic weapons might be theoretically possible, but were not practically achievable within timeframes relevant to Germany's immediate military needs. And this assessment, whether it reflected genuine technical judgment, or whether it reflected Heisenberg's reluctance to provide Nazi Germany with such weapons, effectively ended serious German pursuit of atomic weapons development. The Manhattan Project that the United States initiated in 1942 represented mobilization of American scientific and industrial resources on unprecedented scale for a single weapons program. And the project was directed by General Leslie Groves of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and involved coordination of multiple research facilities, industrial production sites, and testing locations. The scientific leadership was provided by J. Robert Oppenheimer and his team at Los Alamos, New Mexico, where the actual weapons were designed and assembled, and the industrial facilities at Oak Ridge produced enriched uranium-235 through gaseous diffusion and electromagnetic separation processes that required massive amounts of electrical power and precision engineering. The plutonium production reactors at Hanford, Washington, represented industrial facilities on scales that had never been attempted for such purposes, and that consumed resources that only American industrial capacity could provide. And the scientists who worked on the Manhattan Project included many European refugees who had fled Nazi persecution and who brought expertise in theoretical physics, experimental techniques, and engineering approaches that were essential to the program's success. The Trinity test on July 16, 1945, in the New Mexico desert successfully demonstrated that atomic weapons were feasible and that the destructive power was even greater than theoretical calculations had predicted, and the explosion, equivalent to approximately 22,000 tons of TNT, created a blast wave, fireball, and mushroom cloud that demonstrated the revolutionary nature of the weapons, and that confirmed American success in developing functional atomic bombs. The test occurred after Germany's surrender in May 1945. So, whatever intelligence Hitler may have received about the American atomic weapons program in April 1945 would have been based on evidence of the program's existence and scale rather than on direct evidence of successful weapons tests. The bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, and Nagasaki on August 9, 1945, demonstrated American willingness to use atomic weapons operationally and demonstrated the devastation such weapons could inflict. The Hiroshima bomb, a uranium-235 weapon called Little Boy, destroyed approximately 5 square miles of the city and killed an estimated 140,000 people by the end of 1945 through immediate blast effects, burns, and radiation exposure. And the Nagasaki bomb, a plutonium weapon called Fat Man, killed approximately 70,000 people despite being more powerful than the Hiroshima bomb because Nagasaki's terrain limited blast effects. The question of what Hitler knew about the American atomic weapons program in April 1945, and when he learned whatever he knew, is complicated by the fragmentary nature of surviving records from the bunker's final days, and by the general chaos that characterized German intelligence operations in the war's final weeks. Some accounts suggest that intelligence about American atomic research reached Hitler in late April and contributed to his despair about Germany's strategic position, while other accounts suggest that Hitler may never have received detailed intelligence about the Manhattan Project before his suicide on April 30th. Though what is clear is that German intelligence services had collected some information about unusual American activities that might be related to atomic weapons development, and that this intelligence would have been available to German leadership in some form. The contrast between German and American approaches to atomic weapons development reflected broader patterns in how the two nations conducted scientific research and weapons development during the war, with Germany's approach characterized by multiple competing research programs, by limited resources that had to be allocated among competing priorities, by ideological constraints that had driven away Jewish scientists who might have contributed, and by focus on weapons that could be fielded immediately rather than on long-term research programs with uncertain outcomes, while America's approach was characterized by massive resource commitment to a single coordinated program, by systematic organization under military and civilian leadership, by willingness to pursue expensive research whose payoff was uncertain, and by ability to draw on scientific talent from across the world, including refugee scientists fleeing Nazi persecution. When Hitler learned, if he learned in sufficiently detailed form before his death, that America had built 2 atomic bombs and possessed the scientific knowledge and industrial capacity to produce additional such weapons, he was learning the final demonstration of American superiority in precisely the areas where Nazi ideology had insisted German racial purity would ensure advantage. The nation that Nazi propaganda had characterized as racially mongrel and culturally decadent had mobilized scientific talent from across the world, including scientists fleeing Nazi persecution, and had organized industrial resources on scales that Germany could not match to create weapons that represented the future of warfare, and that ensured totalitarianism's defeat not just in World War II, but in the broader ideological struggle between democracy and authoritarianism. The atomic bomb represented not just a military weapon, but a symbol of what open societies capable of international scientific cooperation and massive resource mobilization could achieve, and its development by America rather than by Nazi Germany represented the vindication of every assessment about American power that Hitler had dismissed throughout his career, and the final proof that ideological certainties about racial superiority were no match for the material and organizational realities that determined outcomes in modern technological warfare.